I'm very excited to release this episode with Jack Newton. Jack is the founder and CEO of Clio. Clio is the world's leading provider of cloud-based legal technology, providing lawyers with low barrier, affordable solutions to manage and grow their firms more effectively, more profitably, and with better client experiences. Their products redefine how lawyers manage their firms by equipping them with the tools they need to run their firms securely from any device, anywhere. This episode is brought to you by three incredible supporters that make this podcast happen. VanHack. Let me introduce you to VanHack. Startups of all sizes choose VanHack because they only offer handpicked developers with 3 or more years of experience who have strong portfolios. Great Canadian tech companies like Neo Financial, Fair, Wattpad, Applyboard, and League have worked with VanHack, and they have had an amazing experience. Go to vanhack.com and check out their talent pool without having to log in and see for yourself. When you sign up, tell them Evan from The Hard Part sent you for a 25% discount. Float. Float is a complete business finance for Canadian companies. They offer modern financial services, powerful software, and industry-leading support designed for every industry and stage of growth. They are a fantastic team, and their products include corporate cards, bill pay, expense management, and high-yield accounts, and gives finance teams everything needed to manage spend and cash flow efficiently. To learn more, visit floatfinancial.com. Bloom. Just because the economy is uncertain doesn't mean your shred claim has to be. Bloom. Bloom is the only shred firm that guarantees their work. They meet with you every quarter and show you exactly how much you've accrued, and their pricing, it's posted online with a cap, so you know what to expect. No guessing, no surprises. Head to SR&ED.ca, that's shred.ca, and see why more Canadian innovators are choosing Bloom as their shred partner. I'm so excited for you to listen to this episode with Jack. It was incredible to sit down with him in Vancouver during Web Summit and record this episode. We chatted about their first round of financing while his wife was 8+ months pregnant. We talked about their Series F. We talked about the future of legal tech and AI and much more. I'm super excited to release this episode just after they announced a major acquisition yesterday. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode.
Yeah, I think the first question I want to start with, I reached out to your co-founder to get some interesting questions.
Some curveballs.
He was talking about, so your wife was about 8.5 months pregnant, and you were only allowed to travel to Germany for, I think, under 48 hours.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't miss the birth of your first child.
Yeah.
So I just want to kind of talk about that trip, super interesting. And also, you had to go to Germany for investment. I think, was that like the first round?
Yeah.
So yeah, I would love to, I suppose there's a really good story behind that.
There's a great story in there. Basically, this is back in 2008. Me and Ryan, my co-founder at Clio, had been pounding the pavement with every Western Canada, Western US based VC, angel, you name it, trying to scrounge up our Series A investment round, which you'll laugh, back in 2008, $1 million Series A was what we were trying to raise. But for anyone listening that's old enough to remember, 2008 was not a great year to be raising money. We were in the depths of the global financial crisis. Banks were collapsing, and people were legitimately worried that the financial system as we knew it was going to collapse. So Ryan and I heard a ton of just very frustrating feedback, which was, we love the pitch. This is one of the best decks we've ever seen. We love the opportunity. Normally, we'd love to invest, but we're just not writing checks right now. People really had gone pencils down on investing in over the course of almost all of 2008.
Yeah.
So out of the blue, one day, Ryan and I are, again, raising friends and family money along the way. We'd raised about $100,000 of friends and family and fools money, and still, have enormous gratitude to my parents, even my brothers and other folks that were really in no financial position to roll the dice on an idea like Clio, supporting us in those early days. And they got us to help get us to that Series A eventually. But with this backdrop of hearing rejection just 100 times over, Ryan ends up on a really long customer support call. And he's just bored out of his mind on this call.
Yeah.
And I think for the first time in his life wonders what's in my spam folder. I wonder if there's any interesting email in my spam folder, which nobody ever does, right? But Ryan did that day, and we were on an early version of Google Suite back in those days, and the spam filter was really good. You really started trusting it pretty quickly. But Ryan goes into the spam folder and sees an email from this guy named Christoph Jans, who's a German-based investor. And the problem is this email reads like a scam email. First of all, he's emailing from a web.de email address.
Yeah.
He's then, the body of the email, he says, "Hey, Clio, I'm really interested in investing in your company. I just read about you on a blog, on this Web 2.0 central blog that my buddy Reg Charami ran out of Edmonton. Clio looks like a great company. I'd love to invest, and if you're open to it, I'd love to jump on a phone call." And just to give you a bit of background on myself, I just sold my company Page Flakes to the MySpace group.
Okay.
I've just become an angel investor and just made my first investment in a company called Zendesk out of Denmark.
Yeah.
And he invested in Zendesk when it was 4 guys working out of a cafe in Copenhagen. So Christoph had a couple of really great early hits, including Zendesk and Clio. What's hilarious is Ryan, then sees a follow-up email. This email from Christoph was from about 3 weeks ago. He sees a follow-up email 2 weeks later from Christoph saying, "Hey, I'm sure you guys are getting a ton of investor interest." We weren't, and maybe too busy to respond to me, but I'd love to have a conversation.
Yeah.
And so again, thanks to the fact that we inadvertently slow played him by not responding to his email, he's getting even more interested. And Ryan forwards me both of these emails and says, "This actually looks legit." And I read them and I agree that they look legit. Respond to Christoph. We jump on, I think in those days, a Skype call, have a great initial conversation. He tells us about some of his learnings with Zendesk over the first few months.
Yeah.
And back in those days too, SaaS was like an oral tradition. Like there wasn't blogs from Jason Lemkin and David Skoke and others writing about SaaS metrics. It was almost like this oral tradition. So Christoph was able to share some of the early lessons in SaaS with me and Ryan. So we were instantly captivated and wanted to get this guy on the cap table. And we talked for a couple of months, and eventually Christoph says, "Look, I'm ready to write a check in you guys, but I want to see the whites of your eyes and shake your hand in person." And I said, this is to Ryan's background on the story. I said, "Well, my wife is 8 months pregnant. We're expecting our first child. Is there any chance you could come out and see us in Vancouver?" And Christoph says, "Well, my wife is actually 8.5 months pregnant. Maybe you guys could come out here just because I slightly edge you out on how pregnant my wife is." And I negotiate with my wife Tanya, who's always been a huge support of Clio and what we're trying to do. And she says, "You can go to Germany, but you need to make it quick. I don't want you to miss the birth of your first child." And I didn't want to miss that either, 100%. Of course. So me and Ryan end up doing this crazy, basically, 24, 48-hour trip out to Germany where we flew out to Berlin, met with Christoph for a better part of a day, slept one night there, and got on a plane back to Vancouver. And I made it back with, as it turns out, plenty of time to spare for seeing Ian, my oldest child, born. And Christoph, just after that trip, wrote the first $1 million check into
Wow.
Clio. Strangely, that relationship with Christoph in Germany is what led to our Series B investor that wrote the first really meaningful check into Clio from an institutional fund. It came from Germany. There was a fund called Acton. Although the venture partner with Acton was a local Vancouver investor named Boris Wirtz.
Yep.
So Boris was kind of the second person to join our board after Christoph, the second sophisticated investor to join the company, and that resulted in several trips to Germany over the years. Yep. To meet with investors and help build that early cap table. So really, that early story of Clio's growth, we very much, one of the questions I've gotten a lot this week at Web Summit is, why don't we have more Canadian VCs on the cap table? And we tried really hard, and ended up, again, getting this kind of cold inbound interest from all places, from Germany. And so, one of the takeaway lessons people come from my talks, when I talk to startups about our journey and so on, the takeaway is check your spam folder. You never know what's in there.
I love that.
Ryan also had another question about Clio's values and and your values specifically, and how it's contributed to Clio's values. And he mentioned draw the owl. And you didn't give me you didn't give me any other context other than draw the owl.
Draw the owl. So this is one of Clio's core values, and it comes from an internet meme that I stumbled across back in 2008, and it just resonated with me perfectly in terms of when I try to think, how can we, with a meme, communicate what our culture at Clio should be like. And this meme is basically, if you remember the old children drawing books that gave you 5 steps on how to draw an owl or how to draw a deer or whatever. This meme was how to draw an owl, and it says step 1 is draw a small circle for the head and a big circle for the body. And step 2, it shows this beautifully, immaculately realized owl, like out of an encyclopedia drawing, perfect plumage and everything else. And step 2 reads, draw the rest of the effing owl. And so, for me, this really embodied what we're looking for in employees at Clio, which is people that can draw the effing owl, people that can take the broad strokes and figure out how to execute on an idea without a lot of hand-holding. And the most powerful employees you can have at a company like Clio are people that you can point in a direction and say, I don't know all the steps between where we are now and where we need to get to make this thing a reality, but I need you to be able to fill in the gaps and go in and run at it and get it done.
Yeah.
And that has been a meme and a value tracing all the way back to our very, very beginnings, and something that still resonates with people today. We took the profanity out of the value as we grew. You can still get the idea across with Draw the Owl.
What have you really learned about kind of like scaling up the company from like a culture standpoint? Thousands of employees. Like what have you really learned about like scaling to that scale? What have you taken away from that? Do you do things kind of differently? I'm sure maybe you got a lot of advice along the way, and maybe you kind of trusted your gut in certain instances. What's worked well?
Well, I think my biggest learning about culture is really your culture is nothing more than the sum total of the people that are in your organization and the way you recognize and treat those people. So, often culture is a reflection back of the people you've hired. I think it's one of the reasons, and I think we were good, and I think we were lucky in that I think your first 10 hires at a company have probably really cemented what your culture looks like in the kind of way that's your formative DNA. And if you get something really wrong about those 10 initial hires, I think that's what kills most companies. You need to be really deliberate about those first 10 hires. And then beyond those 10 hires, in the scaling journey for Clio, when we started reaching, I would call it 150 employees or so, and that's crossing the Dunbar number, right? Where, for any of your listeners that aren't familiar with that concept, the Dunbar number is the number of relationships we can kind of keep in our head, right? And for most people, it's around 150 people you can keep in your head, and then you start running into people in the lunchroom and you're like, I don't know who you are. And Clio now is well beyond that Dunbar number. I run into people in the elevator, in the lobby, in the lunchroom every day that I've never met before, or even if I haven't met them enough times to remember them or their kids' names or anything. So that Dunbar number, I think, is a really critical threshold as you grow past in a company. What we felt at Clio was we got those first 10 people right, so that kind of primordial soup of culture was great. And those 10 people had grown into 100 people and then 150 people that, we felt the culture was amazing and these people were hiring other amazing people. But then what Ryan and I found is there was actually a few hires that he and I had never met in the interview process, and that we actually felt whoever hired them had made an error in judgment in terms of bringing this person on the company. We're like, this isn't us.
Yeah.
But we couldn't quite put our finger on exactly what that was. So at that point, what we felt was really important was let's actually try to codify our values and write them down, because they were implicit. Yeah. And again, we felt our culture was special. It was awesome. People loved working at the company, and we were accomplishing great things. but we couldn't quite put our finger on or articulate exactly what our values were. So we put it back to employees. Again, pretty small group of employees at that point, but 150 employees, we made it a grassroots thing and said, what do you think our values are? And we had different focus groups, and the group came up with ultimately 7 values, and those ended up being our 7 formative values that I think, and to my second comment, having that framework is really important. And then you need to think really deliberately about how do I enshrine these values into the day-to-day behaviors of people, so they don't just end up being, in a poster on a wall somewhere and completely forgotten, but they're actually institutionalized and people refer to them. So we very deliberately made them part of our hiring rubric. So when you're hiring somebody at Clio, the interview questions help establish whether this person aligns with and resonates with our values. One of our values, for example, is customer success comes first. We'll ask interview questions. Tell us about a time in your career that you had to make a decision that optimized for a customer outcome over, maybe what would have been maybe a better financial outcome for the company. Tell us about, drawing the owl. Tell us about a time that you were given an open-ended, ambiguous mandate by your manager and were able to execute against that. So we make it part of the hiring process. We make it part of the promotion process. So when we go through our annual review cycle and we're talking about what have people done in the company, we talk about the what they accomplished, but also the how. And the how is how did they achieve this goal living our values and aligning to our values. And then finally, and this is kind of the dark underbelly of all of this, but it's important, is we terminate people when they don't align with our values as well. And if they repeatedly show that they do not ascribe to our values, we have a conversation and say, maybe Clio's not the best place for you. Because I think ultimately one way of thinking about those values is, these are the rules of the sport we're playing at this company. And this is what gets recognized, this is what gets rewarded, and this is what gets punished. And that's not necessarily for everyone. And let people kind of self-select out if that's not the right fit for them. So getting really clear on values, and one thing you'll hear from everybody at Clio is they talk about values on a daily basis. And I think if you do a great job at values, it helps decisions happen lower in the organization because people understand what matters and how to make good decisions. And you also get to see, the culture thrive as you scale. And we've been able to go from 150 people to 1,500 plus people now with those values basically unchanged. And I think it's really helped propagate our culture and helped our culture thrive through that hyper growth phase.
I'm sure AI has just been in all your conversations, whether it's like Web Summit, at Clio, whatever, and especially being in like the legal space, which is lots of text, lots of documents, lots of things. How have you really thought about kind of adding AI into Clio? And maybe you've been doing this before it was cool and everyone was talking about it.
Yeah, so number one, AI is absolutely at the forefront of our thinking at Clio. It's absolutely, to your point, front of mind for everybody in legal. When Gen AI first came on the scene, Goldman Sachs published a report of the industries that were going to be most impacted by AI, and legal was number 2 next to only administrative workers in general, with 44% of the tasks in legal being vulnerable to automation through AI. So, and just to pick up on a point you made as well, when you look at what Gen AI is strongest at today and where it has its superpowers, it's with text. And it's with text where you've got large corpuses of text and lots of precedent to train on. And you're basically describing when you describe what is Gen AI ideally suited for, what are the current generation of LLMs best at, it's exactly the kind of the nature of work that lawyers do day in and day out. And I think in a really kind of simplistic sense, when you think about legal work, what lawyers are doing, what law firms are doing, they take documents as input, they take large corpuses of data, whether that's case law or other inputs, to align against those documents, and ultimately produce documents as an output. That's the ultimate work product. So LLMs today are a perfect fit for legal work, and we're deploying them throughout Clio to weave into all of our core workflows. And another underlying thesis that we've got at Clio is that AI is going to really help drive the worlds of the business of law and the practice of law together. And what have traditionally been quite disjoint systems, your business of law, like Clio, and your practice of law software and research databases and so on are going to become more inextricably intertwined thanks to AI as well. So we're very excited about this future world at Clio, and with Clio Duo are trying to bring that vision of what the future of legal work could look like, where ultimately we see, of course, we do not see AI replacing lawyers, but we see AI giving lawyers superpowers, and see AI being able to enable lawyers to deliver higher quality work faster, and to expand their reach and expand ultimately the total addressable market of legal services by being able to structurally lower the cost of delivering legal services thanks to the efficiencies that AI delivers.
How do you think about like product now at this scale and stage of the business versus like, when you're a startup, maybe 10 people in a room, pivoting, changing, building new product, maybe that can happen at a quicker pace. How do you kind of think about things now that 1,500 plus people, teams, organization? Like when you do something like new, like Clio Duo and like these AI tools, how do you kind of stay nimble and startup mentality even at this scale?
Number one, it's hard. There's a certain amount of inertia that takes over in big companies, and I think this is what you constantly need to fight against as your company grows.
Yep.
I really love the way Jeff Bezos frames it in a couple of different ways, actually. One, he talks about the day one mentality, and the day one mentality being you always need to be acting with a sense of urgency and with a sense of invention around how you're progressing your business model, and that the moment you become complacent is the moment that your business starts to die. And I really believe in that. So I'm constantly with my teams pushing a sense of urgency, an urge to innovate on behalf of our customers and to continue to innovate. And ultimately, Clio's leadership position in the marketplace comes to us from product leadership. And we have an incredible product leadership position today, but we have dozens of competitors that would love to eat our lunch, and we need to be moving faster than the competition and innovating and delivering customer value faster than any of our competitors in order to maintain that leadership position. So that's something I'm constantly trying to enshrine is in a nutshell that day one mentality. The other concept that we have borrowed from Amazon at Clio is this concept of 2 pizza teams. Yep. And another management insight I think that Jeff Bezos is exactly on point with is it's really hard to have large teams that move fast. Just the communication overhead, everything about the way large teams work is almost inherently slow because of that communication overhead. So he tries to limit his teams, and we at Clio try to limit our teams to teams that 2 pizzas can feed, but not much larger than that. So. Yeah. We, for our Duo team, for example, when we decided what we wanted to do with Duo, we said, hey, look, this is our like elite team of 10 people or so that we're going to align against this project and protect them. That's the other piece, is you need to kind of protect them ruthlessly from other distractions and other priorities, and get them to run at it. And the last thing I would comment on is you've got to be super clear on your priorities. As you grow as a company, we're 1,500 employees, which is challenging in scale, but we also have over 1,500 legal professionals on the platform. So we have a very long list of things we could be doing, things our customers are asking us to do, things our internal employees think would be great ideas for us to execute against. Yeah. And I think about the concept of your efforts as a company being a set of vectors. And if you just let the company end up pursuing anything they want, you end up with a bunch of random vectors and a bunch of random directions. And the mathematics of that are interesting. If you sum up a bunch of random vectors, you end up with 0. So that's the tension you need to address, or the entropy you need to address in a large company. Is if you don't control that, you end up doing a bunch of things, but you'll see a bunch of motion, but not necessarily a lot of progress. And so we use a framework that a lot of tech companies use, but we've adopted it, for almost 15 years now at Clio, called OKRs, or Objectives and Key Results. And they help us ladder all the way from the top of the company down to individual departments and even individual people, in terms of here's the top level priorities, here's how this objective and this set of key results crystallize at the company level, and then here's how these ladder down into individual department level objectives and key results that contribute to that company objective. Maybe that then ladders down to a team, and then that ladders down even to the individual level. So it's hard, but editing down that list of 1 million things to a list of 3 or 4 or 5 priorities for the year. And there's a lot of leaders that would say even the 3 or 4 or 5 is too many, and you should really be trying to get 1 or 2 priorities that you're going to say, here's something we're going to make a ton of progress on. And everything else is kind of collateral to that. And so that focus, a framework for tracking progress, are I think some of the secrets to scaling and still managing to ship.
You talked about kind of like things that Amazon has done, OKRs, which kind of made popular by Google and other companies. How have you kind of thought about that on your founder journey of like, hey, these things have worked for other companies, how do we adapt them to ours? What are some unique things that we do that's just like unique to us? Like, I'm sure you get advice thrown at you a lot over the last decade plus. Like, how have you kind of filtered that and say, hey, like these are the right things for us, and maybe blocking out other things that might not work so well?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think for one, you can draw a ton of inspiration from other companies in terms of culture and operating systems, and you don't need to reinvent the wheel from scratch. And everything is a remix, including company culture. And I think as the CEO and founder, one of your more important roles is deciding, like, as you think about all the places you could get inspired by and integrate into your culture, what actually resonates. And I think culture, is one part reflection, like when you're articulating your culture, when you're even talking about things like values, or at Clio we have a set of leadership and operating principles that pair with the values as well, that are kind of a playbook. Like, how do we get stuff done at Clio? I think it's really important that you look at those and think, what resonates with me? What kind of company do I want to create? What reflects reality today in terms of the culture at the company? But those values and the framework around the values can also be partly aspirational. What do we want to be in the future? And I've been personally really inspired by a bunch of different cultures, but also really actively reject some other elements of those cultures. Like Amazon's a great example. Amazon is a high performance culture. Their set of leadership and operating principles is incredible. There's a lot of language they use that I love, like the idea of strong opinions loosely held, the concept of disagree and commit around decision making. I think they've got some phenomenal frameworks and language and common language around how to talk about performance. What I don't love about Amazon is, they've got a reputation for basically looking at employees as fungible resources and chewing up employees in an extremely demanding environment and spitting them out in 2 years. So there's parts of the Amazon culture that we've borrowed from, and language that we credit back to Amazon but use internally at Clio because it really works for us and resonates with us. But there's other parts of that culture that we reject, and instead say our overall North Star for culture at Clio is this idea of building a human and high-performing culture. So we want to build a high-performance culture, a culture where everybody can have expectations that every other Cleon is an extremely high performer, but we don't expect people to leave after 2 years because they're burnt out. We don't want to see people crying in their cubicles because they've had a brutal day. We want people to feel supported in that high-performance journey, and we want to invest, like we invest in things like personal coaches, performance coaches in the company, available to anybody in the company. We invest a huge amount into our learning and development team that help level up our employees. We have an in-house created leadership management program called Basecamp that we've put now hundreds of employees at Clio through over the years. And so we really actively invest in supporting our employees. And I think it's important that you have this unique perspective on the culture you're trying to build, that a North Star like ours of being human and high performing. Find all the amazing resources that can help contribute to that. We've been inspired by Kin Scott and Radical Candor. We talk about the value of feedback a ton at Clio, and Radical Candor is a book that we hand to every new employee and say, read this front to back, because this is how we work at Clio. Netflix is another company I've been deeply inspired by, and Reed Hastings' No Rules Rules book. And even in the early days of Clio, I remember coming across the Netflix culture deck and just being completely blown away and enchanted by Reed and his team's take on culture and some of these controversial ideas at this point, but the idea that we're a team, not a family, and these kind of concepts really resonated with me. So again, find the parts of other company cultures that you want to adopt and remix into your own thing, but also have a strong perspective on what makes us special and unique, because every company, I think, has something that is unique about them that they want to make sure they're articulating really strongly. Because again, if you do a good job of that, you can attract the right people that resonate with what you're trying to create in that culture, and also that can act as a negative filter and keep people that aren't a good fit out of the organization.
I'd love to talk just about 2008, $1 million Series A, now you're at Series F, $900 million, and just that kind of period of time from 2008 to now, and what are you looking at looking forward now, and you're in this kind of different position of maybe a little bit more scarcity when you're starting the company, a bit more of abundance type things now, and where do you kind of take the company from here over that next time period?
Yeah. Well, one thing I'll say is the first $1 million was a lot harder to raise than the next $1 billion+ we've raised. I think it's super hard to convince people to make that initial leap. All we've got is a product with maybe a few dozen customers and a few $1,000s of monthly recurring revenue. Getting that first believer that isn't a relative of yours to write a check into that idea is extraordinarily hard. And then as you start seeing success and you start having traction, it becomes a lot easier for people to believe in what you're doing. So our Series B, was 2012, and it was still a tough time in the economy, and that was around, we still had a pretty challenging time raising that $6 million. But by the time the Series C came around 2 years later in 2014, the economy had really heated up again. The startup world had heated up again. We had a very competitive round. And then, cut to the Series F last year, $900 million US, with, if you can believe it, $500 million of oversubscribed demand that we couldn't address in the round. So we could have raised $1.5 billion if we wanted to in that round, which is just mind-boggling to me. But it shows the amount of demand when you've got traction, you've got this flywheel of success and word of mouth and scale going for you, and when you've got a very clear industry leadership position and you're growing quickly and we're profitable, which is something that created a huge amount of investor demand. It's a complete 180 from what raising that first million looked like. But I think what we've been good at Clio over the course of the last 17 years is also growing in a really disciplined way. The legal market isn't a market where you grow 1,000% year over year. Clio's the kind of company that's been growing over the last decade plus 40-50% a year, but compounding religiously on an annual basis. And I think when again, it's just the miracle of compounding. You do that on a long-term enough basis and you build a real scaled business. Today we're over 300 million of ARR, over 1,500 employees, 150,000 plus legal professionals on the platform, still growing extremely quickly. Our growth is actually accelerating. We've got a huge tailwind at our back, I think, thanks to both COVID-19, which helped accelerate technology adoption in legal.
Yep.
But we're also seeing AI kind of push the laggards in cloud adoption over the hump, and law firms that were still using on-premise systems are finally realizing like, oh, yeah, I'm not gonna be able to leverage AI unless I'm leveraging the cloud. And that's driving, the final, in that technology diffusion curve, the late majority and the laggards into the adoption cycle. So we've got a lot of structural tailwinds. I think AI is an extremely exciting opportunity for us. And the way we think about the broader opportunity now is, there's number one, a tremendous TAM just in the software and payments opportunity in legal. But as we look at the AI opportunity and we think about the ability for AI to do the work and really help lawyers accomplish more, there's actually an opportunity to participate in the larger $1 trillion of TAM that is represented in the total legal spend annually worldwide.
Maybe a question more focused just on like Canadian tech in general, and like there's people out there that just be like, we need more Clios, we need more Clios. And like it's kind of very easy thing to just kind of blurt out and say that we need that. But what are your thoughts on how do we build more companies, whether they look exactly like Clio or just like success more generally?
Yeah. Well, look, we do need more Clios in that, we need more scaled companies that have gotten to multiple hundred millions of revenue and importantly are creating the next wave of entrepreneurs and the next wave of startups. So, one of my favorite business concepts I talk about endlessly is just the concept of a flywheel. And Jim Collins popularized this notion in his book, Good to Great. And whether it's a business or whether it's an economy or a tech ecosystem, I think the concept of a flywheel is really important. And again, the general concept of a flywheel is you put a lot of energy into getting it going, but once you get it going, it's almost a perpetual motion machine, and it feeds on itself in some ways. When people say we need more Clios, I think what they're really saying is we need a bit more weight in that flywheel. If you just have one Clio, it's not a flywheel. If Clio stumbles and knock wood, goes out of business or has a bad few years or whatever, that's not going to help the economy perpetuate. What we need is a critical mass of startup companies that are thriving and creating this ecosystem of success. And when I look at the Canadian ecosystem, or even on a more micro level, what's going on in Toronto or Kitchener-Waterloo or Vancouver, what we have in almost all those situations is one or two companies that are kind of Clio scale or up, but nothing else. And what I want to see in the Canadian ecosystem is, we need more Shopifys, we need more Clios, we need more point-click cares that have really achieved that scale of growth that will help us get that flywheel of momentum going. And again, my dream is, at Clio, I talked about the idea of not having people that burn out after 2 years. What I want to see at Clio is people that have basically got an MBA in what it takes to build great products and great companies by working at Clio for 5 or 10 years or longer, and then have become wealthy thanks to the stock options they've gotten at Clio, and can go roll the dice on their own idea, go build their own startup. And that's not just one person, but over time, that's 10 people or 100 people that are Clio alumni that are out in the ecosystem building the next great startup for Canada. And that they in turn are pulling more talent into the ecosystem. And the more great companies you have, the more great talent you've got. And that's the definition of a flywheel. And what I think we need in Canada, when people say, we need more Clios, is maybe better put, we need more weight in that flywheel. We need more Series A, Series B, Series F public stage companies contributing to this ecosystem. And when we hit that critical mass, we're going to have something really enduring and fantastic in the technology space here.
I'm curious just about where you get the energy from, getting close to 20 years of working on Clio. Obviously it's fun, obviously you enjoy it, obviously it's growing, there's always interesting things, but where do you kind of get that from? Where do you get that energy, that excitement, and that longevity, and just being willing to go at it for such a long period of time?
Yeah, Well, one thing is, 17 years is objectively a long time. It's how long I've been working on Clio. And as I mentioned at the outset, I had my first son the same year I started Clio. And I've subsequently had two more kids. And at one point we had 3 kids under 3, as well as a startup called Clio in my house. And so between 3 kids and Clio, 17 years has gone by in a snap. So that's one bit of context. But I also feel really proud of what we've built. And in a lot of ways, Clio is my life's work. And I see myself doing this for, another 5 or 10 years because it's still hugely energizing. What I talk about with Clio is the idea that we want to build an enduring generational company. And I'm not building Clio to flip or to sell it to, Thomson or Lexus or some other big company. I want to build a big standalone, enduring company that is employing thousands of people and that we can build a 100-year company with Clio. And part of the reason I think that's important is the mission that we're pursuing at Clio. And our mission is to transform the legal experience for all. I think transforming an industry like legal, and now that's transforming it with the cloud as well as transforming it with AI, that's something that doesn't happen overnight. That's something you need to invest years in doing. And my dream is that we can build through our values and through our operating system and through our clarity of mission and purpose, a company that can endure long after me and Ryan and others are no longer directly involved with it. So that's my hope. The other thing I would add is the opportunity, for me personally, when I think about and reflect on my experience over the last 17 years, the job, of course, has not been the same. Every quarter, really, it's a new job. I'm running the biggest company I've ever run. I'm working with a new set of challenges, a technology landscape that's constantly evolving. The amount of excitement I've got around AI and the impact it's going to have legal is the same or even greater than the excitement I felt around the cloud and what it could do for legal. So for me, that constantly evolving challenge makes it really easy to stay engaged and excited to get up in the morning because it's a new challenge and a new opportunity every week, every month.
I love it. It's been a lot of fun. I really appreciate the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for jumping on.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you.
Yeah, that was awesome.